All right. So today we're going to talk about the federal bureaucracy, which basically, when you're talking about the executive branch, you're talking about the president, but you're also talking about his entire staff and all the federal agencies that fall underneath the executive branch. This slideshow won't match exactly with your book, but it's a really good overview of everything you need to know. This is all chapter 11, and we're doing it in one day. So just know for the test, I'll try not to be too specific with chapter 11. But if you answer the questions on the organizer, you'll be fine. Okay. So to do, all I have today is, watch your slides and complete your organizer. And once again, you shouldn't be opening it at this point. You guys already should have one saved for yourself that you've been working on. All right. A bureaucracy. That word means a large, complex structure that handles everyday business of an organization. It can be anything. A bureaucracy could be any level of government. It could also be when you're looking at big corporations or things like that, you might even hear that. But a lot of times when you hear bureaucracy, it does refer to the government. This is a huge slide. Don't feel like you need to see all of that. Let's see. Let me present for just a second because I know that'll bring it up bigger. But if you look at this, this is the government of the United States and kind of how it's organized. So you've got the executive branch. First, let's look at this. So the legislative branch, this is it. This is legislative branch. You've got the Supreme Court under the judicial branch and then the lower courts under there for U.S. courts. The executive branch is everything else on this slide. So starting from the top with the president and then working down to the cabinet, that's what all these departments are. And then finally, all these different independent agencies. And this isn't even all of them. That's just some of them. So the federal bureaucracy is huge. Once again, I'll leave the screen big, even though I know you can't see some stuff on the bottom here, but these are just the different staff agencies that either support the president or other administrators. So on the left, you'll see the executive office of the president. I think that's one of your vocab words on your sheet. And basically, the executive office of the president is the White House. What goes on in the White House? And then what specific things do the staff of the White House control? So that's over here on the left. We're going to talk more about the cabinet. That's the executive departments. That's in the middle. So I'm going to kind of skip over that one right now. And then you have the independent agencies. And that includes CIA, FBI, NASA, a lot of those initials that you hear. That you see on television, some of those like the CIA, obviously Amtrak is actually a federal organization. Do you guys know what Amtrak is? So Amtrak is the train system in our nation. You guys, I'm sure have heard of NASA. So there's tons and tons of different agencies within that. So we'll take a step back here to the executive office of the president. That is a group of agencies that work most closely with the president, including his advisors and aides. The executive office are the people that run the White House. So it would include the chief of staff, your press secretary, who, if you've watched news, any type of political news, there's a female press secretary right now. You have a speechwriter. The president doesn't write his own speeches a lot of times. Now, that's not always true, but there is a person that writes speeches to make sure that what's being said is, thoroughly researched and clear and concise. Like I said, that's not always the case. And sometimes presidents want to do their own thing, but there is somebody there that does that. The chief of staff is the second, you think of the vice president as second in command to the president, but actually it's the chief of staff. The chief of staff helps the president run the White House. So he might not deal with national security and things like that, but he's the one in charge of making the meetings for national security, for the different cabinet members, all those kinds of things. The chief of staff runs the president's White House. You've also got the National Security Council runs right out of the White House, and the budget is run out of the White House. Most of those other agencies, they have their own locations throughout Washington, D.C. Now, you guys do have a whole section on the cabinet, and I know the book, chapter 11, section 2, I think, gives special attention to the cabinet and the cabinet's role. I'm just looking at the book right now. Yes. And it will go through, and this is on your sheet, all the different cabinets and what they do. So the cabinet is appointed by the president. So the people that head the cabinet are actually appointed by the president to their roles. Generally, the people that run each of the departments of the cabinet are people that have expert knowledge of that department. So whoever runs the Department of Ag, you would hope that the president puts a person in that department that knows about agriculture. I think it's in this unit. It might have been in the last one where we talk about the civil service and the spoil system. The spoil system is this idea that people in power can put whoever they want into a cabinet position. The truth of the matter is the president can put whoever he wants, whether or not they have expertise in that area or not. And I'm just going to use our current president because, please know that this has happened with every president, but a lot of times there are people in the cabinet that are questionable as far as being able to lead that department. I'm just going to use our current education secretary, Betsy DeVos, because she has never worked in public education. She's a big private school person, and she believes that money should be given to private and charter schools and voucher schools and things like that. So she was pretty controversial when she was nominated for that cabinet position. But truthfully, others don't have a whole lot of say in who makes up that cabinet. So that's where we're at. That's the cabinet. And like I said, that is chapter 11, section 2. And for your executive branch outline, it actually has each of those positions. And I just want you to read in your book what those different departments are and have a basic understanding of what they do. Here's some more definitions, and I believe several of these are actually on your sheet. So these are just basic definitions of the cabinet itself. The executive office of the president, the chief of staff, and like it says here, it's the most trusted advisor and oversees the work of the White House, and the press secretary, who's the person that when news needs to get out to the public, the press secretary often delivers that. There is a term here, executive privilege, I want you guys to take a look at. Executive privilege, and I'll go back to that. Executive privilege. Presidents use this right to keep information with their advisors confidential. Basically, what that means is what's said in the White House stays in the White House. The president does not have to divulge information that he's talked with his cabinet members, his chief of staff, the executive office. He does not have to divulge that information to the public. That information can be kept private. Part of the reason that has always been part of the White House is that many of the conversations that happen need to be confidential for national security, because they're just talking and it's not national policy. And sometimes when things come out from the president, people think that that's just the way it is, that that's the law of the land, and it's not. So that's why those conversations with the president need to be kept confidential, because it might just be a discussion, and if it's taken out of context or somebody leaks it to the press, that it could be problematic. So the president has that right to keep some secrets, basically. This is just a slide asking what are the functions of the 15 different departments. Like I said, you have that on your sheet. all the different departments are listed there, and that can certainly be something that you spend a little bit of time with on your organizer. Okay, independent agencies. So they are the agencies that handle very specific parts of the government, and they include exploring space, EPA, protecting our environment, maintaining peace. There's more than 100 of them. You don't have to know them all. They're independent to protect from political parties or interest groups. So they're part of the White House and they're part of the executive branch, even though the president right now is Republican. Those agencies don't go away. So they're nonpartisan, meaning they shouldn't be Democratic, they shouldn't be Republican. They are just agencies that help our nation run, help our economy run, help the Postal Service run, all those sorts of things. The people that work for those agencies are civil service agents, meaning they're a group of government employees whose hiring and pay is regulated by Congress, and they're federal employees. So U.S. postal workers are federal employees. If you steal mail or commit mail fraud, it's a federal offense. You'll actually if you end up in court, you'll be in a federal court. And if you end up in prison, you'd be in a federal prison. And if a civil service agent commits a crime, they're committing a federal crime, not just a state or a local crime. The patronage system, I think that's one of your vocab words. It's giving job to your friends. And it's kind of the same thing as the spoils system. And there have been some changes to this throughout history to make it less, to make presidents and people high in the executive branch less able to do that. And one of the things is that this is just a political cartoon basically showing that the president is giving jobs to all his friends and family. To combat that, what we have is the civil service system. And basically to get one of those jobs, you have to take a test. And what that ensures is that somebody can't just appoint you to a job and you have no knowledge of it. You actually have to be a part of the civil service. You actually have to be a part of that civil service system and pass a test in order to get there. So it would be just like me as a teacher having to pass a state exam in order to be allowed to teach. Civil service agents have to pass a test in order to be able to get the jobs that they have. So that's civil service. The whistleblowers, you guys have heard of that. There's a little video I'm going to show here. A whistleblower is a federal employee who reports corruption and wrongdoing of the government. So sometimes bad things happen in government agencies. We know that. Whistleblowers are people that call attention to that. So Edward Snowden was one of the most recent, and let me just show that video.
My name is Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii. What are some of the positions that you held previously within the intelligence community? I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer. One of the things people are going to be most interested in trying to understand who you are and what you're thinking is there came some point in time when you crossed this line of thinking about being a whistleblower to making the choice to actually become a whistleblower. Walk people through that decision-making process. When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing, but over the course of a normal person's career, you'd only see one or two of these instances. When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis. And you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses. And when you talk to people about them, in a place like this where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously and move on from them. But over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up, and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who's simply hired by the government. Talk a little bit about how the American surveillance state actually functions. Does it target the actions of Americans? NSA and the intelligence community in general is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can by any means possible. But it believes, on the grounds of sort of a self-certification, that they serve the national interest. Originally, we saw that focus very narrowly tailored as foreign intelligence gathered overseas. Now, increasingly, we see that it's happening domestically. And to do that, the NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends. So while they may be intended to target someone associated with a foreign government or someone that they suspect of terrorism, they're collecting your communications to do so. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything. But I, sitting at my desk, certainly have the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
One of the extraordinary parts about this episode is that usually whistleblowers do what they do anonymously and take steps to remain anonymous for as long as they can, which they hope often is forever. You, on the other hand, have decided to do the opposite, which is to declare yourself openly as the person behind these disclosures. Why did you choose to do that?
I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic model. When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy. And if you do that in secret consistently, as the government does when it wants to benefit from that secret action that it took, it'll kind of give its officials a mandate to go, hey, tell the press about this thing and that thing, so the public is on our side. But they rarely, if ever, do that when an abuse occurs. That falls to individual citizens, but they're typically maligned. It becomes a thing of these people are against the country or against the government. But I'm not. I'm no different from anybody else. I don't have special skills. I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I would love if you guys want to pop in and comment on what he was a whistleblower for. So basically, and this was a big deal when it happened. So it was 8 or 9 years ago when he initially did it. Basically, what he's saying is that the NSA, the National Security Advisors, are able to basically spy on anyone in the United States that they want to. How do you feel about that? And do you guys think he was right in going and blowing that, like going and telling people that that's what our nation was doing? What do you guys think? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone there?
It was probably a good idea.
It's a good idea that he was a whistleblower?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Just to know that by having like this little doodad, the government can spy on me. You know, some people have a huge problem with that, and I get it. Me, I'm like, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't really care if the government spies on me. And it's not like they just pick random people. I mean, if they're going to actually target somebody, they would target somebody. But you're looking at an agency superseding the power of pretty much all the branches, including the president, the courts, and Congress. Really, if they can do that to anybody, where's their power coming from? And I guess that was the big thing and the big problem that Edward Snowden had with it, is that who gives the NSA the authority to do this to the typical American citizen? And the United States response was, no, we don't target, individuals. We look for terrorists. We look for people that are doing something wrong. But at the same time, with the information and the technology that they have, they can target the average American. Also, information that they found, should it be admissible in court or not? Because, like, if you wiretap somebody's phone, which is essentially what they're saying that they can do, is they can interrupt those communications like on cell phones. Usually in court, you have to have a court order in order to do that. And Snowden basically said that they're not using court orders, they're just doing it. So he thought he was doing the right thing. I think he's living out of the country right now. Don't quote me on that, but I actually, while I'm doing this, I will look that up for you guys. Okay, so I think the whole whistleblower thing is really interesting. Okay. All right. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Those are all these little alerts I get. Okay, so Snowden's actually living in Russia right now. They gave him amnesty, meaning that he's there and he's living safely there, and we really can't touch him. So that's where he is now, because our country, basically, if he comes back to the United States, he's probably going to be locked up because the government said what he did was wrong. Okay, enough about that. I just think it's a really interesting thing. And if you guys want to go and finish the whole video, you can just go to it in the slides. So what does the executive branch do? They set public policy, rules, regulations. They figure out how much we're going to owe for taxes. They figure out things like what's acceptable and not acceptable on U.S. airwaves, radio, TV, movies. They set environmental standards. So they do a lot. The executive branch, the agencies there, that is what basically runs our government. Certainly, Congress makes our laws, and there's other things it does. The Supreme Court the courts make sure that the laws that are written are being followed and that they're constitutional. But the executive branch pretty much runs all the other federal agencies. It's huge, and that could be a problem. Sometimes people say, rather than the government run and pay for all these agencies, maybe they should be independent and they should make their own money. The problem with that is if they're not controlled by the federal government, then some of the rules and things wouldn't apply to them, and that would be probably detrimental to us as citizens because there would be no federal regulations for things like the environment, and that would be really bad. How do interest groups, PACs, political action committees, how do they affect the bureaucracy? Well, they can certainly do to the agencies just like we can do to our Congress people to try and influence them. And then the last term there is government regulation, which I said is just designed to protect you guys. In English, back when you guys, I think you guys maybe read an excerpt when you were sophomores the book called The Jungle. It was the book that was written, and maybe you guys remember, it was written in the turn of the 19th century about a meat packing plant and how horrendous the conditions were, that people would lose their fingers in the meat, and that was acceptable. They would put out rotten meat and be able to sell it, and that was acceptable. So that's where government regulation comes in and saying, hey, if you're going to run a food plant, you have to make sure that it's clean and it's safe and those kinds of things. And that goes from big, huge jobs to, little jobs or local places like McDonald's or any restaurant in town has regulations they need to follow through OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And OSHA makes sure that your workplace is a safe place to be. In fact, with COVID, we have, all these cleaners and things that we're using. And our first Friday back as teachers, they cleaned the building, and I was getting, I'm really sensitive to smell. And the bleach smell was so strong that I was getting like a sore throat and I was feeling sick. And that would be an OSHA problem. Like, you can't be using cleaners that are going to make your employees and your kids sick. So I actually talked to Mr. Jackson about that. And he talked to John Witt, and it turns out like they didn't need to use as strong a concentration to kill the COVID germs if there were any. So they reduced it. So they added more water to their cleaners. So the following week when they cleaned, there was just barely a hint of that bleach smell, like not even as much as when you go to a pool. But that is something that comes from government regulation, saying like, John Wick could have just said, nope, we're going to use it because that's what's safest for the kids. But if it's going to make the employees sick because they use something so strong, that's not acceptable. All right. There's a video that goes over all this. It's a crash course. I'm not going to show it in class. If you guys want to watch it, it's in the slideshow, so you're welcome to watch it. All right. So things that you should know. Structure and purpose of the bureaucracy. So you don't have to know all the different agencies. You just have to know kind of the president and the White House, and the executive office of the president are kind of there. You've got the cabinet members below them. And then you've got all the independent agencies are below that. Understanding what the executive office of the president is, what's the cabinet, all those 15 departments, and what do they do, and what's the purpose of independent agencies. So not what's the individual purpose of the IRS, but what's the purpose in general of having independent agencies. Oh, and this is wrong. This is supposed to be Monday. I will change that. So read chapter 11. That's going to help you fill out that worksheet, and then we're going to have the test on Monday. I'm going to be here on Monday to answer questions for you, and you can use any notes that you have. And it's going to be this one, and the judicial branch test will be more like the book test, the multiple choice, matching, that kind of thing. And then